We're told that the economy dominates the argument rather than cultural, linguistic, or historical divisions. But how salient have the economic arguments been with the public or the electorate? What seems to me to have happened is that a lot of the arguments as presented by both sides have been highly technical. Now, during the financial crisis in Ireland, you could discuss bond yields with taxi drivers relatively easily. However, much though I enjoy talking to taxi drivers, I've yet to meet one who is prepared to discuss the issue of whether Scotland and England form an optimal currency area. So there has been a clear desire on the part of the public and businesses to quite a large extent for more information. But a lot of the responses from both sides have been technical and not entirely relevant. They have tended to skip over issues of the availability and accuracy of data, and also the relevance of international and historical comparisons on which they are based. Too many qualifications would suggest uncertainty, which is a problem that has already been alluded to a lot in the discussion of the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey. The problem of uncertainty is a problem for the Yes campaign, it seems to me, but not exclusively, because issues now, such as the UK's continued membership of the EU, are emerging, which might have a potentially negative effect on the Better Together campaign. There is also, I think, an important distinction to be made between the economic issues that economists think are important and the economic issues that the electorate think are important. For example, the debate has pretty much the academic, or which I'll come on to, the debate that has taken place, has focused very much on stabilisation policy rather than on economic growth. That's a bit ironic in the sense that the Scottish Government's main purpose is to maximise the rate of sustainable economic growth. And in a sense, what you feel from the answers to the question that John quoted early on is that people want to be sure that over the next year or in successive years that their income will be secure, and in a sense that's sort of saying, well, what we really want to be sure about is that the economy will continue to grow. Okay, so we've had a barrage of papers from the Scottish Government itself, from the Fiscal Commission, and from HM Treasury. These are the main contributions. John referred to them earlier on, a barrage of papers that has been heading exactly where. We've had effectively a duel between two groups of people, two groups mainly of academic economists, which have really not had all that much impact, it seems to me. If you most people, I suspect, even in this room, would struggle with some of the issues that are raised. Certainly, the average elector, it seems to me, would struggle with some of the issues that have been raised. So, a lot of the research conducted by ourselves at Stirling, by the IFS, by the National Institute, follow that pattern as well. And the question is, to what extent will it ever trickle down into the general consciousness of the undecideds about whom we're talking? So far, it seems to me the debate, as far as the economists have been concerned, has been interesting, but not game-changing. What debates are getting some attention? It seems to me there are some, now this may be slightly prejudiced on my part, some debates that have got some momentum behind them. Others have fallen by the wayside. I think the currency debate matters somewhat. Debt, deficits, pensions, inequality and welfare are making some headway into at least the media and the debate amongst those who are very involved with it. Some exogenous drivers of difference are up there. They're not really, in a sense, a debate around economics. It's what is going to happen in relation to North Sea oil, what is going to happen in relation to demographic change, and maybe sort of half economics, half legal, what's going to happen to the regulatory framework. And what's important to realise that some of these things are going to happen anyway. It doesn't matter what Scottish constitutional status is. Demographic change is going to happen to a large extent. We are still going to continue to recover oil from the North Sea. The debates, and this has again already been alluded to, that rest in peace, are those around the Scotland Act 2012. I often use that as a trick question when speaking to audience, what is it? Not often do I get a very good reply. The universalism means testing debate seems to have been partially parked at the minute, although the Labour Party raised it earlier on last year. And the intermediate debates, understandably it seems to me, about intermediate powers have also at the moment been set by the wayside. So let me take some of the issues that have gained some salience and discuss within the time available. I may have to cut this a little bit short, where they have got to. I'll take them really according to my prejudice, and I would put currency at the top. So it seems to me that as far as currency, the currency argument goes, it runs pretty much as follows. Based on current trade patterns and factor flows, Scotland and the rest of the UK seem to form what economists call an optimal currency area. That is an area that ought to share a single currency. We do know that there is some literature, and the Treasury has explored this, that international borders matter, even within free trade areas, in that there's less trade across international borders than there are across, say, state borders. But this is not the main objection to the Stirling zone. The issue really is that the relevant parties to a common Stirling zone would both have to see it as in their own interest to be part of that arrangement. And this cannot be guaranteed a priori. If the trade benefits seem to be outweighed by other considerations, there is no guarantee that a deal can be struck. Other considerations include things like deposit insurance, lender of last resort facilities, fiscal imbalances, etc. These can be used to generate increased uncertainty by better together, and in a sense that plays into the general issue of uncertainty. Effectively, uncertainty is the enemy of change, it seems to me. Influence on the Bank of England, incidentally, is kind of a red herring because Scotland doesn't have much in the way of influence on the Bank of England as it currently stands. Debt. The debt debate has hardly caught fire, but it bubbles away. It has actually caused preemptive action, as was it John or Lindsay said, on the part of the UK government, which has agreed that it will continue to pay its debts, which may not seem like a big deal, but if you want to know the background to that, you need to read the blogs on the SRC website. Two further points. This is a really unfortunate timing for an independence debate. In a sense, it's a political accident that came out of the 2011 election. But if independence occurs, Scotland will be a small, heavily indebted country If it does not, Scotland will be part of a large, heavily indebted country. Neither side really wants to take that issue on in the context of the independence debate. The technical language is there. It's there in what the Fiscal Commission says. It's there in what the Treasury says. It has been alluded to in the IFS reports, but both sides tend to avoid the language which involves the dreaded word austerity, which I will certainly return to. My second point is a really techie point, which I think has gained some traction but very little understanding. I tried to explain it to Brian last week, and I'm not sure whether I succeeded or not. It's called a liquidity premium, and it has to do with the interest rate that small countries have to pay on their debt relative to large countries. And Angus Armstrong at the National Institute has principally done the research in this area. I don't think that's an argument that is going to have much traction with the average punter, but it does actually matter. Let's look at how the debt builds up from the annual deficits, which is just the sum of the debt is just the sum of the annual deficits. This is my latest toy, which shows how much spending is, what the total value is of spending is in relation to the size of the relevant rectangle. So that's how we spend our money. This, using the GERS data, is how much we raise. And there's a little bit of a gap there. There's a little bit of a gap. So this is for 2011-12. These are the sources of income on the left side and the sources of spending on the right. This is the deficit. Budget deficit, 5% of GDP, £7.6 billion, more than 3 times the value of council tax revenues. The Scottish deficit is coming down. It is lower at the moment than the UK deficit, but is still relatively high in terms of international developed countries. That tends not to be the language used by either side in this debate. This has implication, but no one really wants to talk about them. Perhaps Better Together doesn't want to be seen to be too negative, but the Yes campaign doesn't want to talk about it, even though it is clearly implicit in the Fiscal Commission reports that that deficit has to be closed, at least in the medium term. At the UK level, both Conservatives and the Labour Party now seem quite happy to talk about eliminating budget deficits altogether, but that doesn't form any part of our discussion. If Scotland were to join the EU, then there's the small issue of the Fiscal Stability Treaty. These are the blue countries all have to sign up because they're part of the Eurozone. The yellow countries are parties to it, but not part of the Eurozone. And the UK has said that it might sign up. That fiscal compact says that we should be heading for a structural deficit of 1% of GDP. The previous slide that Scotland was currently at 5%. So, how does the whole debate of how do you change the deficit, how do you deal with the deficit, seems to be pretty much absent from what we've from our debate that has focused on independence. In terms of pensions, we're going to bring out a paper next month which will say that it's actually cheaper to fund pensions in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. Kind of obvious reason why. We die quickly. The other issue, which is kind of unresolved, has to do with the solvency of cross-border pension schemes. We have no idea, more uncertainty, how the EU would treat that particular issue. the regulation that cross-border pension schemes, which covers lots of pension schemes within the UK, need to be solvent. Let me skip inequality. Let me talk about welfare. If there's lots of uncertainty, the way to deal with it is to spread as much reassurance as you possibly can. This is how £16 billion out of the £64 billion spending in Scotland is allocated in terms of benefits. The maroon rectangles are those that are spent on pensioners, those above pension age. So you can see that constitutes a pretty large proportion of the total. Neither side wants to mess with this area. Both sides have said that the state pension will be covered by what's called the triple lock, which is essentially protecting its real value over the future. The bedroom tax is there, but it's way down in the bottom right-hand corner where the amounts are so small that they hardly figure in the great scheme of things. So this has been an area where, again, the debate has been pretty limited because I think neither side really wants to scare the other. And that, I think, also explains why the Better Together campaign has reeled back somewhat from the universalism means testing debate in recent months. 2 points that matter. North Sea oil is volatile. You cannot escape that point. Therefore, there's uncertainty associated with it. Why do I put this graph up? I put this graph up because of a conversation that I had with Luis Moreno. And it's about the issue of whether there's going to be some huge shock which will change the game over the next few months. Well, we do know some things. We know now that it looks like the UK economy, and Scotland tends to follow pretty much exactly the same path as the UK economy, will be growing strongly over the next 12 months. IMF have just increased the growth rate forecast to 2.4%. Oil revenues are going to come down in terms of their actual value by 4.7 billion. Why does that matter? The latest figure I'm showing here is 2012-13. The data on the famous GERS, which shows the pluses and minuses of the Scottish budget, which I showed in the previous slide, go only up to 2011-12. What this number will show is that Scotland's fiscal position will be worsening because of the fall in oil revenues, whereas the UK, given the growth rate, is likely to be in an improving situation. Final point is I think another part of the debate which is happening anyway has to do with demographic change and Scotland's inability to deal with demographic change. Scotland is aging, or at least the number of pensioners relative to the number of people of working age is increasing faster in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. Does that mean that it's going to be incapable? This graph shows old age dependency ratios, number of pensioners per working age person across Europe in 2012. All things are relative. This is the picture in 2040. The forecast picture in 2040 has the UK as having the most favourable demographic setting amongst all of the European Union countries. The basket cases, you'll be surprised to hear, are Germany and Italy. Demographic changes is happening, it's relative. Let's not overplay the problems that Scotland might face in relation to these. So that's all I want to say. There's a lot of uncertainty, it seems to me, Generally, that favours the Better Together campaign rather than the No campaign. But there is also this issue that seems to me that what economists consider to be key economic areas, such as currency, aren't really having all that much traction with the voters.